The first major structure we're looking at is Saint-Étienne at Caen. And it is considered a Norman masterpiece. It's actually started by the Norman ruler William the Conqueror, who was then buried there in 1087. William the Conqueror, of course, starting as William the Bastard. We'll get into that story. And when he's buried, there's a lot of issues. He's a very large man. It's the heat of summer. The body explodes. The chapel bursts into flames, and the monks loot the body. But leaving all of that aside, he also would go on to build two monasteries, one for the monks and one for the nuns. And what we see at the center of this is this church at Saint-Étienne. What you're looking at is the west side of the building, called the Westwork. And they're inheriting a lot of this style from the Carolingians and the Ottonians. We see four large buttressing strips, creating three bays across the structure, really dividing it into three parts. The facade is basically a large rectangle, split both horizontally and vertically into threes, three being a sacred number, of course. And so it divides into effectively three registers if we were looking at this in terms of pottery. There is no external sculptural decoration. In terms of the plan of the structure, what we see is something very rectangular. Let's avoid the choir because that's going to be added in the Gothic later on. And just look at this structure. And it has a very cruciform plan. It looks like what we would typically think of as French Romanesque. And of course, it's going to be heavily influenced by the French. Inside, we see a structure that was originally conceived to have a wooden roof, but they replace it later with stone rib vaults, which is what we're seeing here, except here they're broken into 6 parts. So as you look at the rib vaults here, you'll notice that we have our crossing rib vault, like a groin, but then you have an arch through the center. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts, or a 6-part rib vault. This is experimental. They're trying to determine if this is going to be stronger, better than what we've seen in the past. Of course, what we usually see is what you see on the right, and that is a 4-part groin vault or rib vault that we're going to see much more in the Gothic. But there is a certain amount of experimentation, especially at the end of the Romanesque and the early Gothic, where they're playing with these ideas. They're seeing what's going to work. Can they simplify it? Can they complicate it in a way that maybe allows for a higher roof? In terms of elevation, we see something that is a 3-part elevation, which we've seen in the past. So we have an arcade, which is the aisle, so it's at ground level. Then we have the gallery up above, and then we have the clerestory there just for light. And it's really looking towards the Gothic. This is a structure that is giving us a lot of the ideas that will become Gothic later on. And we're right at the cusp of the Romanesque and the Gothic at this point. And it should be pointed out that there isn't really a defining line. It's artificial. When we break these things between the Romanesque and the Gothic, we sort of draw a line and go, here is the next chapter. But in reality, it's more of a spectrum. It's slowly progressing over time, over tens and hundreds of years, that we're seeing these changes take place.